The parchment hit the black marble floor with a soft, dismissive slap. It was an Exile Decree, a death sentence wrapped in royal red wax. Lyra knelt at the base of the silver throne. Her grey wool cloak was torn at the shoulder, a brutal reminder of the guards who had dragged her here. A thin line of dried blood marked her pale cheek. The silver court was completely silent. They were waiting for her to break. They were waiting for the tears, the begging, the desperate pleas of a Luna who had just been stripped of her title. They wanted to see her shatter. But Lyra did not cry. She did not lower her head. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her fingers curling quietly around a charred fragment of Moonstone hidden deep in her pocket. It was cold against her skin, grounding her. Above her, Alpha King Kaelen sat rigid. His obsidian armor caught the dim torchlight, his silver eyes completely devoid of warmth. He was a war king, a ruler who believed that absolute order was the only way to protect his people. And Lyra, with her silent wolf and entirely absent scent, was a flaw in his perfect kingdom. The council had declared her a barren omega, a mistake of fate. The Ashwood Pack, a woman's voice echoed through the hall. Lady Vanya stood beside the king's throne. She wore a pristine white gown, her lips curved into a slow, triumphant smile. She possessed the fire magic the court revered, the magic Kaelen believed he needed to secure his borders. A fitting place for a wolf with no power. Vanya purred, making sure the entire hall could hear the mockery in her tone. The snow there falls black. The soil is dead. Perhaps the ash will finally hide your shame, Lyra. Whispers rippled through the packed hall. Ashwood was not just a borderland, it was a cursed graveyard. No one survived the winter there. Kaelen's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his suffocating alpha aura pressing down on the room, forcing the whispers to stop. He looked at Lyra, expecting to see terror in her hazel eyes. He expected her to crawl to the steps and beg for a lesser punishment. Lyra slowly reached out. Her calloused fingers brushed the cold stone floor as she picked up the decree. She stood up. She did not brush the dirt from her knees. She did not look at Vanya. She looked directly into the silver eyes of the Alpha King. "I accept the ruling of the crown," Lyra said. Her voice was not loud, but it was perfectly steady. It carried no anger, only a chilling, absolute calm. Kaelen frowned, his thick brows drawing together. This was not the reaction he had calculated. "However," Lyra continued, her tone shifting to the crisp precision of a quartermaster, "as the appointed warden of the eastern border, I require 3 transport carts. I need 20 sacks of winter grain, 10 blankets, and 2 crates of root seeds. If I am to die in the ash, I will do so managing the king's lands as ordered." The court stared at her in stunned disbelief. She had just been handed a death sentence, and she was asking for seeds. Vanya let out a harsh laugh. "You think you can farm in poisoned dirt? You are a fool." "Enough!" Kaelen's voice cracked through the room like a whip. He stared at Lyra. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in his chest, a strange, unnameable pressure. He forced it down. "Give her the supplies," Kaelen commanded, his voice cold and final. "And let her be gone before nightfall." Lyra gave a single measured nod. She turned her back on the throne. She turned her back on the false Luna. She walked toward the heavy oak doors, her boots echoing with slow, deliberate rhythm. She was halfway across the room when the seal cracked, just for a microsecond. The dark magic the Queen Mother had used to seal Lyra's scent faltered under the sheer weight of Lyra's willpower. A scent hit the air. It was faint, but unmistakable. Rain on dry earth. The smell of life returning after a brute drought. It hit Kaelen like a physical blow. Behind his ribs, his massive black wolf suddenly slammed against his chest, snarling violently. The beast woke with terrifying force, clawing at Kaelen's mind, howling a word he could not understand.
I need your help.
Mine. Kaelen gripped the iron armrests of his throne so hard the metal groaned. His breath hitched. His eyes flashed pure, primal gold for one terrifying second before he forced the color back to silver. He stared at the heavy doors swinging shut behind the woman in the torn grey cloak. He told himself it was just the scent of an approaching winter storm. He told himself he had made the right choice for his kingdom. He had no idea he had just exiled the only thing keeping his throne alive. The journey took 4 days. By the time the wooden transport carts crossed the border into the Ashwood Pack, the sky had turned the color of bruised iron. Here, the snow did not fall white. It drifted down in dark, ashen flakes, covering the rotting roofs of the village in a thick layer of grey dust. The curse of the eastern border was not just a myth meant to frighten pups. It was real, and it was starving the people to death. When Lyra stepped down from the cart, her boots sank into the frozen, poisoned mud. A small crowd of villagers had gathered. They were gaunt, their faces hollowed out by months of rationing and bitter cold. They wore patched furs and stared at her with a mixture of resentment and exhaustion. They knew who she was. The exile. Edluna. A discarded woman sent by the Alpha King to die among the forgotten. They expected her to weep. They expected her to demand the warmest cabin, to complain about the cold, to hide away until the frost took her. Lyra adjusted her torn grey wool cloak against the biting wind. She did not look at the ruined cabins or the black snow. She looked at the people. She reached into the back of the wagon and pulled out a heavy leather-bound ledger. She flipped it open, uncapped her pen, and looked up. "Who is the quartermaster of this village?" Lyra asked. Her voice cut clearly through the freezing wind. An older man with a limp and a heavily scarred face stepped forward, eyeing her cautiously. "I am, my lady. Name is Silas." "I am no longer a lady of the Silver Court," Lyra replied evenly. "I am your warden. Unload the second cart. We have 20 sacks of winter grain and 10 blankets. The grain goes to the families with the youngest pups first. The blankets go to the elders. Record every distribution." Silas blinked, staring at her in shock. "You brought food?" "I brought what I could carry," Lyra said, her eyes already scanning the barren fields behind the village. "And I brought seeds. Show me the planting grounds." The villagers exchanged bewildered looks. This was not the behavior of a broken woman. This was the behavior of a ruler. Silas led her to a vast expanse of frozen, blacky, Ned earth. The soil was hard as iron, choked with the ash-rot curse that had plagued the land for a decade. Nothing had grown here in years. "It's dead land, Warden," Silas said quietly, watching her face. "The cold kills the roots before they can catch. It's useless." Lyra did not answer. She walked to the edge of the field, setting her ledger down on a frozen stump. She unclasped her cloak, folding it neatly beside the book. The biting wind immediately tore at her thin dress, but she did not shiver. She walked over to a rusted iron hoe leaning against a dead oak tree. She picked it up, testing its weight in her calloused hands. Then she raised it and struck the frozen earth. A sharp clack echoed across the dead field. The soil barely yielded. Lyra raised the hoe and struck again, and again. The villagers stood in stunned silence, watching the exiled mate of the Alpha King doing the labor of the lowest servant. She worked with a steady, punishing rhythm. She did not ask for help. She did not stop to rest. She just kept breaking the cursed earth, forcing it open inch by inch. For 2 hours, the only sound in the Ashwood Pack was the rhythmic strike of iron against frozen dirt. The ice was jagged and cruel. As Lyra gripped the wooden handle, a blister tore open on her palm. It was a small injury, but the cold made it burn fiercely. She paused, dropping the hoe. Her breathing was heavy, misting in the freezing air. She reached into her pocket with her injured hand to pull out the charred moonstone from Agment. She needed its cold weight to ground her, to remind her why she was fighting. As her fingers closed around the black stone, a single drop of blood from her torn palm smeared across its surface. The stone pulsed. It was faint at first, a heartbeat of warmth against her cold skin. Lyra opened her hand. Where her blood had touched the charred rock, a tiny fracture appeared. A sliver of pure, blinding silver light leaked from the crack. Startled, Lyra dropped the stone. It fell into the shallow furrow of black soil she had just dug. The moment the glowing stone touched the earth, a low, deep vibration hummed through the soles of her boots. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A massive, ancient sigh beneath the frost. Right before her eyes, the black snow surrounding the stone began to melt. The dark, poisoned soil turned a rich, deep brown, and then, impossible and undeniable, a single, vibrant green sprout pierced the frozen earth, uncurling its leaves toward the grey sky. Lyra stared at the fragile green leaf. Her bloodline had not been barren. It had only been waiting for a land that needed healing. 2 weeks passed in Ashwood. The single green sprout that had broken through the black snow was no longer alone. A small, vibrant patch of life now thrived around the stump where Lyra had first struck the earth. The villagers did not understand the magic, but they understood survival. Seeing their exiled warden working until her hands bled without a single word of complaint had fundamentally shifted something in the pack. They no longer watched her with resentment. They worked beside her. Lyra was in the ruined glass greenhouse, inspecting a crate of seeds, when Silas rushed through the shattered doorway. The old quartermaster was breathless, his face pale. "Warden," Silas panted. "The northern stream. It stopped flowing." Lyra set down her ledger, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Frozen. Damned, Silas corrected, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. I found fresh tracks, silver court boots. They collapsed the ravine to block the spring. It's the Queen Mother's work, I'm sure of it. Without that water, the crops will die before they even root. We will dehydrate in a week. He waited for Lyra to show fear. He waited for the despair that the capital so desperately wanted to inflict upon her. Lyra pulled her grey wool cloak tighter around her shoulders. She did not panic. She walked to the center of the ruined greenhouse, where an ancient, dry stone well sat choked with dead vines and ash. The Silver Court forgets, Lyra said quietly. Water does not belong to the crown. It belongs to the earth. She reached into her pocket and drew out the charred Moonstone fragment. The tiny fracture of silver light she had awakened days ago was still glowing, humming faintly against her palm. She knelt beside the dry well. She did not chant or kurr, as to spell. She simply placed the glowing stone onto the cracked stone basin and pressed her hand flat against the dead earth beside it. "Wake," she whispered. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, a deep shudder rolled through the floorboards of the greenhouse. The charred Moonstone flared with blinding silver light. The dead vines wrapped around the well crumbled into dust, replaced instantly by thick, living green moss. Deep beneath the ground, a heavy, rushing sound began to build. Silas stumbled back as clear, icy water exploded upward from the dry well, spilling over the stone basin and rushing out into the irrigation trenches they had dug. It was not just water. It carried the faint, sweet scent of rain on dry earth. The ancient wards of Ashwood were awake. Hundreds of miles away, in the Silver Throne Hall, Alpha King Kaelen abruptly stopped speaking mid-sentence. He was standing at the war table, surrounded by his generals. Suddenly, a phantom breath of cold, pure air filled his lungs. The sharp scent of rain and wet earth flooded his senses, so powerful it made his vision blur. A sharp, aching pull struck the center of his chest. It was not a wound, but an anchor. Something heavy and ancient was pulling his soul toward the eastern border. Kaelen gripped the edge of the war table, his knuckles turning white. His massive black wolf howled inside his mind, pacing frantically, desperate to run. "My king," Lady Vanya approached, her voice laced with honeyed concern. She reached out, placing a delicate hand on his arm. Her palm radiated an artificial, magical heat, the fire magic that was supposed to protect his kingdom. The moment her heat touched his skin, Kaelen's wolf snapped. "Do not touch me," Kaelen snarled. His voice was a terrifying, inhuman rumble. He physically shoved her hand away, stepping back so violently his chair crashed to the marble floor. His eyes flashed pure molten gold. Vanya gasped, stepping back in genuine fear. The generals froze. The walking was losing control. Kaelen ignored them all. He turned his back on his court, his gold eyes locking onto the massive stained glass window at the end of the hall. The window that faced the east. He did not know what was happening in the cursed lands of Ashwood. He only knew that the fire in his court felt like a lie, and the cold wind calling from the east felt like the only truth left in the world. A full moon hung over the Ashwood Pack, casting a silver glow over a landscape that no longer recognized the word cursed. In just one moon cycle, the transformation had become impossible to hide. The black snow was gone, replaced by rich, dark soil. The seeds Lyra had fought for had not just rooted, they had exploded into life. Tall stalks of winter wheat swayed in the freezing wind, untouched by the frost. The ruined greenhouse was now a fortress of thick, protective vines, and the underground springs flowed with crystal clear water. Lyra stood at the edge of the newly planted fields, her ledger in hand. Her grey wool cloak was still worn, but she stood taller now. The blister on her palm had healed into a tough, silvery scar. She had not just managed the king's lands, she had resurrected them. "Warden!" Silas's voice shattered the quiet night. The old quartermaster was running up the dirt path, waving a torch. Behind him, the village bell began to toll in frantic, sharp bursts. "Riders!" Silas gasped, stopping beside her. 24 men, heavily armed. They bear no crest, but they ride silver-court war horses. They are carrying torches, Warden. They intend to burn the fields. Lyra's eyes darkened. The Queen Mother's patience had clearly run out. If they could not starve Ashwood, they would burn it to the ground and blame the curse. The villagers began to panic, grabbing pitchforks and rusty blades, moving to stand between the riders and their crops. They were outmatched, underfed, and about to be slaughtered. "Stand down," Lyra commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the undeniable weight of an absolute ruler. Silas stared at her. "My lady, they will kill us all." "I said stand down, Silas. Keep the pups in the cabins." Lyra handed him her ledger. She did not draw a weapon. She simply turned and walked alone toward the main road leading into the village. Through the mist, the thunder of oaths grew deafening. 20 heavily armored mercenaries emerged from the tree line, their torches blazing against the night sky. The leader, a massive man with a scarred face, pulled his horse to a halt when he saw the lone woman standing in the center of the road. He looked down at her torn grey cloak and laughed. "Move aside, Omega. The Crown has declared this land condemned. We are here to cleanse the rot." Lyra did not move. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the charred Moonstone. It was no longer just a cracked rock. The silver light inside had fractured the dark surface entirely, glowing with a brilliant, steady pulse. "This land belongs to the earth," Lyra said, her voice echoing unnaturally through the quiet night. "And the earth does not recognize your king." The mercenary sneered and drew his broadsword. "Burn it all!" he roared to his men. They spurred their horses forward. Lyra did not flinch. She closed her eyes and pressed the glowing Moonstone flat against the soil. The response was instantaneous. A massive shockwave of silver moonlight erupted from the stone, sweeping across the ground like a tidal wave. The earth violently trembled. From the dirt, thick, ancient roots the size of tree trunks burst upward. There was no blood. There was no slaughter. There was only the overwhelming, undeniable power of the true White Queen defending her pack. The roots coiled around the horse's legs with gentle but unstoppable force, bringing the charging animals to a safe but abrupt halt. Thick vines lashed out like whips, ripping the torches and swords from the mercenaries' hands, tossing the weapons into the dark river nearby. The men shouted in terror as the forest itself seemed to step forward. The trees groaned, their branches bending downward, forming an impenetrable wooden wall between the attackers and the village. The leader was thrown from his horse, landing hard in the dirt. He scrambled backward, staring in absolute horror at the woman he had called an Omega. Lyra stood up. Her eyes, usually a calm hazel, were glowing with pure, blinding silver light. The air around her hummed with power. "Leave," Lyra whispered. The wind amplified her voice until it shook the leaves. "Or the forest will not be so gentle a second time." The mercenaries did not hesitate. Stripped of their weapons and their pride, they scrambled to their feet, abandoning their horses, and ran back into the darkness. Lyra stood, breathing heavily, the glowing moonstone held tightly in her hand. The roots slowly retracted, leaving the earth undisturbed. A sudden, sharp sound broke the silence. The slow, heavy clopping of a single armored warhorse. Lyra turned. At the edge of the tree line, barely 10 yards away, sat Alpha King Kaelen. He had ridden for 2 days straight, driven out of his mind by the agonizing pull in his chest and the reports of an unsanctioned strike force heading east. His obsidian armor was covered in dust. His massive black wolf was pacing violently inside his soul. Kaelen froze. His silver eyes were wide, taking in the impossible sight before him. The Deadlands were green. The ruined village was thriving. And the woman he had exiled to die in the ash was standing in a halo of moonlight, untouchable, terrifying, and breathtakingly powerful. The heavy branches of the ancient oak trees behind Lyra slowly bent toward her. They were bowing. The Alpha King stared at his rejected mate, the truth finally slamming into his chest with the force of a falling mountain. She was not a barren Omega. She was the Earthsinger. She was the true queen, and he had thrown her away. Kaelen dismounted his warhorse. The heavy clanking of his obsidian armor was the only sound in the moonlit forest. The mercenaries had vanished into the night, leaving the Alpha King entirely alone with the woman he had sentenced to death. He walked slowly toward her, his silver eyes taking in the impossible truth. The air around her smelled of fresh rain and wet earth, the exact scent that had been haunting his every waking moment since the day he banished her. He stopped a few paces away. His massive black wolf was clawing at the inside of his ribs, not with aggression, but with a desperate, overwhelming need to submit. To bare its throat to the woman in the torn grey cloak. "The court told me this land was dead," Kaelen said. His voice was a low, rough rumble, stripped of its usual commanding arrogance. Lyra did not lower her glowing moonstone. She looked at him with the same chilling calm she had worn in the throne room. "The court told you what you wanted to hear, my king. You prefer the absolute finality of ash to the unpredictable work of growing something." The words hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at her hands. He saw the dirt under her fingernails. He saw the thick, silvery scar on her palm where the hoe had torn her skin. She had not used magic to build this. She had bled for it first. A sharp, unfamiliar ache settled heavy in Kaelen's chest. Guilt. Those men, Kaelen said, his jaw tightening as he looked at the abandoned torches on the ground. They bore the steel of the Silver Court. I did not send them. I know, Lyra replied evenly, but your blindness allowed them to be sent. The Queen Mother and your false Luna wish to see this land remain cursed. A thriving Ashwood threatens the narrative that I am worthless. Kaelen stepped closer, the suffocating weight of his alpha aura retracting completely, leaving only the man beneath the armor. He reached out, stopping just an inch from her arm. He wanted to touch her, to confirm she was real, but he knew he had lost that.
Right. You are in danger here, Kaelen commanded, slipping back into the only language he knew. Protection through authority. Gather your things. You are returning to the capital with me tonight. Lyra did not step back. She simply looked into his eyes and shook her head. No. Kaelen froze. I am your king. I am giving you an order. You exiled me, Lyra corrected quietly. You stripped me of my title, handed me a death sentence, and sent me to the graveyard of your kingdom. I accepted your ruling. I built a home in the graveyard. I am the warden of Ashwood now. I did not abandon my pack. Before Kaelen could argue, a sharp, searing pain erupted in his chest. At the exact same moment, Lyra flinched. The collar of her torn cloak slipped, revealing a faded, root-like scar on her collarbone. It was glowing, a faint, pulsing silver light that matched the stone in her hand. The dark magic the Queen Mother had used to seal their mate bond was shattering. The land had recognized its queen, and the Earth's magic was forcing the truth to the surface. Lyra, Kaelen breathed, his voice cracking as the mate bond finally slammed into him without restriction. The realization was devastating. He had let the court humiliate his true mate. He had forced her to kneel. But before he could say another word, the sharp, terrifying blast of royal war horns echoed through the valley. Kaelen spun around. Coming down the ridge were 50 royal guards, their armor gleaming under the moonlight. Riding at the center of the formation was Queen Mother Seraphina, her face pale with fury. Beside her rode Lady Vanya. But something was terribly wrong with the false Luna. Vanya's pristine white gown was singed at the edges. The artificial fire magic she wielded was no longer stable. It flickered in chaotic, violent bursts around her hands. Without the true earth magic of the White Queen to balance the kingdom's ley lines, Vanya's stolen power was beginning to consume her. Patches of dark, necrotic ash rot, the very curse she had helped sustain, were creeping up her forearms. The Queen Mother halted her horse, her eyes widening in horror as she looked past Kaelen to the thriving green fields and the ancient protective roots surrounding the village. She looked at Lyra, standing in the moonlight with the glowing Moonstone. Panic flashed across Seraphina's face. If the king realized the Omega was the true Earthsinger, the Queen Mother's treason would be exposed. "Dark magic!" Seraphina screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Lyra.
The exiled Omega has consorted with dark spirits to corrupt the border. She attacked our scouts. Vanya clutched her rotting arm, her eyes wild with desperation. Kill her, before her curse spreads to the king! The royal guards drew their swords, the sound of steel ringing in the quiet night. They spurred their horses forward, preparing to trample the woman who had just healed their land. The royal guards charged, their swords drawn, their war horses tearing up the newly healed earth of Ashwood. Lyra, he did not step back. She did not scream. Before the first horse could reach her, Alpha King Kaelen moved. He did not draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He stepped directly in front of Lyra, putting his own body between the charging cavalry and his exiled mate. "Hold!" Kaelen roared. The command did not just come from his lungs. It carried the terrifying, crushing weight of his absolute alpha aura. The sheer force of his presence hit the guards like a physical wall of iron. The war horses reared wildly, screaming in panic, throwing several riders to the ground. The formation collapsed instantly. The guards who managed to stay in their saddles froze, their swords trembling. They were sworn to the crown, but the man standing before them was the War King. To disobey that voice was to invite immediate death. "Kaelen!" Queen Mother Seraphina shrieked, struggling to control her panicked horse. "Step aside! She is a witch! Look at the dark magic she has used to corrupt the border!" "The only corruption I see is the lie you fed me." Kaelen's voice was a lethal, quiet rumble that carried across the clearing. His silver eyes locked onto his mother with a cold fury he had never shown her before. "Whoever takes another step toward the Warden of Ashwood dies by my hand." Seraphina's face drained of color. The king had chosen the Omega. Beside the Queen Mother, Lady Vanya began to hyperventilate. The ash rot on her arm was spreading rapidly, burning her veins black. Her fake fire magic was consuming her, desperate for the balancing earth magic she had tried to destroy. "No!" Vanya screamed. "It's mine! The power belongs to the Silver Court!" Driven by terror and pain, Vanya raised both hands. A massive, chaotic sphere of unnatural orange fire ignited between her palms. She didn't aim at Kaelen. She aimed at the ancient oak trees and the newly sprouted fields. She intended to burn Ashwood to the ground, destroying the evidence of Lyra's miracle. She hurled the fire forward. Kaelen braced himself, preparing to take the full blast of the flames to shield Lyra. But a hand, scarred and stained with dirt, gently pushed past his obsidian armor. "My pack does not burn," Lyra whispered. She walked past the Alpha King. She did not run. She moved with the slow, inevitable grace of a rising tide. She approached the center of the ancient oak grove, where a cracked, flat stone basin lay half buried in the earth, an old altar of the moon goddess. Vanya's fire roared toward the village. Lyra raised her hand and pressed the glowing, fractured moonstone into a perfectly shaped indentation in the center of the altar.
What is it?
The stone clicked into place.
So cold.
A soundless shockwave of pure, blinding white light erupted from the altar. It swept through the forest in a heartbeat. The moment the silver light touched Vanya's chaotic fireball, the flames simply dissolved. They did not explode. They were snuffed out into harmless, drifting, white ash. The silver light continued outward, washing over the king, the guards, and the false Luna. When the light hit Vanya, she screamed. The illusion holding her false mate mark shattered like cheap glass. The royal circlet on her head grew impossibly heavy, sliding off her hair and clattering into the mud. The earth itself was rejecting her. When the light washed over Kaelen, the heavy, suffocating pain in his chest vanished. The dark magic his mother had woven to blind him was obliterated. The scent of rain and earth filled his soul, absolute and pure. The mate bond snapped into place with staggering clarity. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. The guards backed their horses away in terror as the earth behind the altar split open. Thick, ancient roots uncoiled like sleeping giants, pushing upward from the deep. Encased within the roots was a structure of solid, flawless white moonstone. It was a throne. Not the iron and obsidian chair of the Silver Court, but the true throne of the Earth Singers. It pulsed with a quiet, ancient heartbeat, radiating a warmth that melted the last remnants of the black snow in the valley. Vanya, weeping and covered in ash rot, scrambled forward into the mud. "It's mine," she sobbed, reaching a trembling hand toward the beautiful stone. "I am the Luna." The moment her fingers brushed the base of the throne, a sharp spark of silver energy violently repelled her, throwing her backward into the dirt. The throne remained empty, its light pulsing in steady rhythm, waiting. The entire clearing fell dead silent. Even the war horses stopped breathing. All eyes turned to the woman in the torn grey wool cloak. Lyra stood before the altar, her hazel eyes completely silver, the root-like mate mark on her collarbone glowing brightly for the whole world to see. The true queen had awakened. The silence in the ancient oak grove was absolute. The royal guards, sent to execute an exiled Omega, were now frozen in the presence of a living myth. The true throne of the Earthsingers pulsed with a soft, rhythmic silver light, casting long shadows across the faces of those who had come to destroy it. Queen Mother Seraphina's face was twisted in disbelief and terror. She looked at the glowing throne, then at her son's broad, armored back, and finally at the woman she had tried so hard to bury. "Arrest her!" Seraphina shrieked, her voice cracking in a desperate attempt to maintain control. She turned to the captain of the guard. "She has enchanted the king! Do your duty! Strike the witch down!" The captain of the guard slowly lowered his sword. He looked at the false Luna, Lady Vanya, who was weeping in the mud, her arm blackened by the very ash rot she had claimed to cure. Then he looked at Lyra, standing untouched in a halo of moonlight, the forest bending to her will. No, one moved. The law of the pack was written in the earth, and the earth had spoken. Alpha King Kaelen turned slowly. The suffocating, lethal aura of the War King descended upon the clearing, but this time it was not aimed at Lyra. It was aimed entirely at the traitors in his court. "Captain!" Kaelen's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that promised death to anyone who disobeyed. "Strip Lady Vanya of the royal colors. Confiscate the Queen Mother's seal." Seraphina gasped, clutching the reins of her horse. Kaelen, I am your mother.
I protected your throne. You poisoned my kingdom, Kaelen replied, his silver eyes cold and unyielding. You forged a mate bond. You let my people starve in the east. And you ordered the execution of my true queen. He stepped toward the guards, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Take them back to the Silver Court in irons. They will stand trial under pack law for treason and the use of forbidden magic. The guards dismounted instantly. There was no hesitation. They hauled the sobbing false Luna to her feet and surrounded the Queen Mother, pulling the royal seal from her trembling hands. The threat of the corrupt court was broken, dismantled not by a bloody slaughter, but by the undeniable exposure of the truth. As the guards led the prisoners away, the villagers of Ashwood slowly emerged from the tree line. Silas, the old quartermaster, stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe as he looked at the Moonstone throne and the thriving green fields. Kaelen stood alone before Lyra. The War King, a man who had conquered entire territories, looked at the woman in the torn grey cloak. He saw the dirt on her dress. He saw the silvery scar on her palm where she had broken the frozen earth when he had given her nothing but a death sentence. He had calculated everything in his life based on power and fear. He had been so afraid of his own destructive wolf that he believed he needed Vanya's artificial fire to maintain order. He had been a fool. Kaelen walked up the steps of the ancient altar. He stopped in front of Lyra. The entire pack held their breath. The Alpha King did not reach out to grab her. He did not pull her into his arms to claim her in a display of dominance. Instead, Kaelen unclasped his heavy obsidian cape, letting it fall to the dirt. He looked into her hazel eyes, and then, slowly, deliberately, the War King dropped to one knee. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered guards and villagers. An Alpha King bowed to no one. "I was blind," Kaelen said. His voice was thick with a heavy, honest remorse. "I tore down my own kingdom because I believed strength only looked like steel and fire. You came to the graveyard I threw you in, and you built a paradise. You did not break. You did not beg." He bowed his head, baring his neck to her in the ultimate gesture of wolf submission. "I do not ask for your forgiveness tonight," Kaelen whispered, the mate bond pulsing warmly between them. "And I do not ask for your submission. I offer mine. To the Warden of Ashwood, to the Earth Singer, to my true Luna." Lyra looked down at the massive, powerful man kneeling at her feet. She felt the fierce, protective devotion radiating from his wolf, pouring through the unsealed bond. He was holding himself fully accountable. He was giving her the choice he had denied her in the Silver Court. Lyra reached out. Her scarred, calloused hand gently touched his jaw, making him look up. "The Silver Court is broken, Kaelen," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of a ruler. "I will not return to a throne of iron." "Then we will not return," Kaelen answered without hesitation. "Where you stand is the center of my kingdom." Lyra held his gaze for a long moment. Then, she stepped past him. She walked toward the glowing white Moonstone throne. She turned, the torn grey wool of her cloak billowing lightly in the night wind, and sat down. The moment she took the seat, A brilliant pulse of silver light washed over the entire valley. The ancient oak trees rustled in joyous approval. The air smelled of rain, blooming flowers, and endless life. Silas was the first to drop to his knees. The villagers of Ashwood followed. Then, the remaining royal guards, their armor clanking loudly in the quiet night, knelt before the ruined altar. Finally, Kaelen rose from his knee. He walked up the steps and took his place standing steadfastly beside her throne, his hand resting near the hilt of his sword, his golden eyes scanning the tree line, not as her master, but as her absolute protector. The Alpha King had sent her to the cursed lands to die, but from the ashes of his rejection, she had rebuilt his world and claimed a crown no one could ever take away. A true crown is not granted by the Alpha King. It is grown from the ashes of his rejection. Do you think Alpha King Kaelen did enough to prove his loyalty after the pain he caused? If you love emotional stories of rejected mates, hidden truths, and powerful queens claiming their rightful place, subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.